All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are so happy to have Mike Bogdan presenting this session called Implementing and Sustaining Target Language Use at PSMLA's first ever virtual conference. My name is Nathan Campbell, and I will be hosting today along with Sister Mary Helen Kashuba. This session is being recorded. If you're tweeting or posting on social media, we welcome you to include @PSMLA1 and hashtag PSMLA21 so we can see and share all of your thoughts. Our presenters' Twitter handles are, Mike, do you have a Twitter? I forgot to ask you.
Nope.
All right, so if you like, you can just tag PSMLA1 or use the hashtag. For attendance purposes, please be sure that your displayed name matches the name used to register for the conference. If you're unsure of how to do that, you can message me in the chat and I'll be happy to provide you with instructions. Please join me in welcoming Mike Bogdan to PSMLA.
Thanks, Nate. Good afternoon, everyone. So I work in Cumberland County in the South Middleton School District, and I've done middle school, I've done French. Currently, I teach full-time high school Spanish, and this semester I'm teaching Spanish 1 and Spanish 4. I also teach at Harrisburg Area Community College. So I hope some of the ideas and tips that I share you'll find relevant, whether you're with level 1 or level 101 novice speakers like I have right now, as well as some of your more advanced speakers, because I do the two ends of the spectrum. So during this session, feel free to type in the chat any resources you have, links you have, as well as any questions for me, and I'll answer them as they come up, or Nate can interrupt me and let me know of any questions that you have. And in addition, that's my email address, very simple, because I'm the PSMLA treasurer. You can also follow up with me there. For example, some of the documents I show, if you want a copy of them, or just something that you don't want to ask right now. I'm going to go through a lot of content in the time that we have, so just ask the questions as they come up, so that way all your questions are responded. So talking about target language, so this is based on the ACTFL core practices, and I've just in a previous session, they mentioned these as well. So hopefully we're all becoming more familiar with these. And two of them specifically deal with speaking the language. So the first one, facilitating target language comprehensibility. We've all seen that number of 90% target language use. And some teachers are very proud that they're 90, 100% target language use, and many others don't like to answer that question because they know that they're still struggling with it. And so we'll look today, well, what kind of language should we use, and how can we try to get to that 90% if we're not there? And if we're doing 90 or 100%, are they actually even understanding us? I was talking to my sister this morning, who's older than me. Today's her birthday, and I told her, what are you doing on a Saturday? I'm presenting, because that's what teachers do on Saturdays. And I told her what I was presenting on, and she took Spanish in high school and said, my teacher, she's from Cuba. She talked in Spanish the whole time, no one knew what was going on. So you want to talk in the target language, but how can we make sure they even know what we are saying? And so I'll talk about that a little bit. And the second core practice listed there, design oral interpersonal communication tasks. And sometimes in our classes, we default to a lot of presentational, to skits, to writing, because they're just probably how we learned, and they're easier to grade. The students are quieter. When interpersonal, they have to get up and move around and talk. So I'll provide some suggestions of how we can prepare students for those interpersonal tasks, which is really what they want to do anyway. So ACTFL has a position statement on their website on target language use. So that's where this is coming from. So just a few things that I pointed out here is that the 90% is not just for teachers, it's actually for the students as well. And so in many cases, we might be meeting that goal or working towards that goal, but our students might be significantly less than us. So it is the students trying to reach that target as well. It's for all levels. So like I said, this semester I'm teaching level 1 and level 4. I'm definitely doing this in level 4. In level 1, I'm certainly not even hitting 50% yet. And I think that's okay, because if 90% is the goal, as long as you're working towards that and you're improving that, I don't think you need to be too down on yourself if you're not at 90% every single day. If you're right now at 10%, trying to get to 25% is a reasonable goal, whereas trying to go from 10% to 90% is probably not reasonable to do in a short period of time. beyond the classroom. So I'm not going to talk about this in this presentation, but if you have language clubs, language honor societies, you do trips abroad, or just seeing the kids in the hallway or the cafeteria, can you greet them or say hi to them in the target language? Or there are other ways that they can experience it outside maybe the 40 minutes or one semester that they have of your class. But ACTFL does provide some strategies for us, because as I said, it's not just talking in the target language the whole time. It's how do we know what to say and that they understand us. So these are the 8 strategies that ACTFL has in their position statement, and I'm going to go through many of these today. And just to summarize some of the key words that I see here, is that it needs to be comprehensible input, so not just speaking in the language, but that they understand a good portion of it. If you teach multiple levels like I do, when one of my Spanish 4 students comes in during our study hall period, when I have my Spanish 1 students in there, and I talk to them in Spanish, the level 1 students kind of look in awe, like, what are they saying? How do they understand that? I know that person, they're on the bathroom. And so I try to explain to them, I use a different type of vocabulary, I speak at a different rate of speed. They're both still correct Spanish, but they're adjusted to be appropriate for their level. Using body language, gestures, and visual support. I'm sure we all do that through posters and pictures and diagrams. I'll show some things I use in my classroom. And I think conducting comprehension checks. So again, we're speaking the target language. How can we see that they know what we're talking about? And in a way that maybe doesn't involve them producing language, especially for those novice learners. Negotiating meaning. So when a student doesn't understand us, or when we don't understand them, what can we do to try to understand each other? That language should gradually increase in fluency, accuracy, and complexity. So how can we go beyond just one word or one sentence or something very basic? That's something I struggle with in my level 4 class, where they're still giving me sentences that I taught them in level 1. And so where's all the vocabulary and structures from level 2 and level 3? And so I have some things in my rubrics like, diverse vocabulary, new words, personal vocabulary lists, because they still tend to give you present tense, I have, I go, and so for all our students, I was pushing them forward so they don't plateau. Self-expression, spontaneous use. I see self-expression as creativity, trying to get the students to personalize, be creative. We always have that one student who isn't really great with grammar, but can be kind of funny or sarcastic in the language. We need to find a way to encourage them, because they're being creative. They just need to work on some of the mechanics of it. And the spontaneous piece is that interpersonal shouldn't be a script that you're reading. It should be something that where they're thinking on their feet. And so I'll have some examples of that. Strategies for requesting clarification and assistance, and then providing feedback to the students so they know how to move forward in their to make progress without feeling shut down when they're making many mistakes. So I'm going to touch on many of these briefly, and then as I go through, again, feel free to put in the chat any resources you have or any questions you have. So starting with comprehensible input. So most of us probably know that term, but from our Pennsylvania celebrities of Glisten and Donato, some keywords when we're looking at comprehensible language, we're not translating. So if you say it in the target language, then translate, they're just going to wait for the translation. So that's not a good technique. But circumlocution and paraphrasing, breaking down a more complicated word into something simpler. And I'll show an example of that in a moment. Slowing down rate of speech, like I talked about with my Spanish 4 students coming to talk to me. Building on known vocabulary. So maybe they know the word already, the word for father, and then when they see the word for stepfather or fatherly, or how can we use the basic words that they learned and they're very comfortable with for a more advanced word or a new word. Using the words and expressions multiple times and recycling them. We know that just because it's on the vocabulary list, or because you did a Kahoot or a Gimkit or a Quizlet or all these other beautiful resources we now have, just because they've seen it a couple times is enough. They need to be using it in a meaningful way. Your tone of voice can certainly change the meaning. You can do grande, pequeño. I mean, something like that. You would know what those words mean by my gestures and the tone of my voice, or a negative word or positive word. And connected discourse. So again, you might have a vocabulary list, like my vocabulary lists are. It's just like lettuce, chicken, soup, bread. But in real life, those words are usually in some sort of context. So the students will have better memory and better use of these words if they see them in an authentic resource. So maybe in a video about cooking, in a menu, in a recipe, in an infographic, and then they see them with other words. So maybe you're trying to teach the word for can. Well, in a food unit, maybe put it with, can of soup or can of soda, but in an environment unit, you put it with aluminum can. And then they learn those other words that are connected to it or would often be associated. And of course, using it in real conversations and real situations. So one of the first units we do in Spanish 1 that I'm teaching this semester are the classes that the students take. And what do schools in other countries look like? I'm sure we all have kind of done that school or education unit. So what I do to kind of show them how much they already know is show some examples of student schedules from other countries. You probably have all found these on Google Images or Pinterest, and you've showed them. And then ask and show them, say, look, you already know, you can probably already figure out what classes a student has, and I haven't even given you a vocabulary list. We haven't learned any of the school words. You can figure them out because of Cogni. So they can usually figure out the word for math and English and art and band. But the word química, chemistry, is one that isn't really hard, but for them, they've never seen it before. It's a QU instead of a CH. They often can't recognize what that is when I'm trying to ask them, is it a math class, a science class? So basic things you can do with a novice learner are show a picture, like you see the picture there. But if it's just sort of a spur of the moment and you don't have time to develop the pictures or draw the pictures, use words that are cognate. So maybe say the word for laboratory, the word for explosion is what I tend to do, and then do the explosion and do that thing. So then they'd probably figure out what class it is. So rather than just when they say, well, what is química? Oh, that's chemistry. Say, es la clase en el laboratorio, y hay muchas explosiones, something like that, then they can figure out what it is. Something for a more advanced class is the word agua fiestas, which in Spanish is like party pooper. That's not a word I ever studied in any vocabulary list, or I probably never read at any point in my education. But if I wanted students to read this newspaper article or read this headline where we were talking about politics in Mexico or presidents, how could I get them to understand that word, which is kind of a, not a common word they're going to come across. So, but all students are going to know the word agua for water and fiesta for party. So that's using the words that they already know, the known structures, to, and then think about it like, water and party, there was a fire. Well, no, it wasn't that. But like they have them do like a think, pair, share, like what are the possibilities, and then they're eventually able to figure it out. So that's obviously a little more complicated because they're talking about a political situation. But if you're teaching, an advanced class or a college class, perhaps, breaking it up into those parts. So what does this half of the word mean in this compound word? And, they can hopefully figure that out. Obviously, comprehensive input is like a whole workshop thing, but that's 5 minutes of a few things that I do. So next is for body language, gestures, and visual support. So this is my classroom. Now, some of these pictures are pre-COVID. The desks are not that close anymore, but the walls are the same. So, I'm a very kind of neat and organized person. So I have a lot of stuff on the walls, but I don't think it's too like explosion of colors and posters like many language teachers have, where there's no room for anything. And I have some close-ups of some of these posters, but it's things such as, like I am with some describing words. So that's, day 1 of Spanish 1. It's mostly cognates like unique, special, optimate, and they're all positive words. And so that's something when I teach them how to say their name and how old they are, they also choose a word from that list. And so that gets into already using a, soy or the je suis or whatever, I am phrase, and looking at adjectives from day 1, and that's always up there. I have weather expressions, color expressions, frequent words, etc. Here's some of them up close. This is something you can buy on Teacher's Discovery. It's just some of these key present tense verbs that you're probably trying to use or want the students to use from the very beginning of the course, but maybe you don't get to, the regular forms of the verb to have until chapter 7, and that's in May. Well, you don't not use the verb at all. They can hear it. And then maybe when there's an activity where it might be beneficial for them to know it, rather than teaching all the forms of tener or all the forms of avoir or whatever verb it is in your language, they're just there, okay? And I realize it doesn't have the you form and the plural form and all that, but for the most part, for a novice learner, they just want to talk about themselves. So, the yo or the je or the I forms are there, and they're just there. And you don't have to wait until you get to the irregular verb section, which many of those are, or the boot verbs, or stem-changing verbs. This is something I made for these verb handles. So things such as I need, I have to, I prefer, I'd like. That again, they can just, kind of attach the verbs that they're learning. They probably all learned to sing, to swim, from the beginning. It allows them to do a little bit more than just I like. And so again, not that I teach these or I use these every day, but they're just sort of there as reference. So when I say them, I can like point to it. Or when they're trying to say something that's in the future or in the past, and we don't even do that at all in that course, they can see the I'm going to expression or the I just expression. So they're available there, again, not as something I teach as a separate lesson, but just when I use it, or if a student is trying to say that, I can point to it and it's just there for them to take. Some circumlocution expressions. So if you do like a taboo activity or a circumlocution activity, for the level 1 students, the novices, they might just say like, animal, brown, little. But for, again, your students who are a few years in, they shouldn't still be doing that same technique of doing taboo or doing a game like that. We want them to learn some expressions like it's a place where, it looks like, it's something that. So that's something I use with the level 4 students when we do a game like taboo, or when they're trying to get their point across, to kind of put it into a sentence. So again, they're showing they're not doing the same technique that they learned in level 1. And then these are those question words. Again, from the first week of school for novice learners, I show them, if I ask you a question in Spanish, you don't know what I'm saying, just say no comprendo or no lo sé, and I'll leave you alone. But don't tell me I don't know what's going on. And then they'll forget that. You got to, you'll point, what do you say? And so, and of course, they're just there in the front of the room. So again, sometimes even your intermediate students forget some of those expressions, and they're just there for students to use as needed. The, can I leave the room words, can I go to the bathroom? Can I go to the nurse kind of words? So again, they're just there because of course you teach them, but then they come to you, can I go to the bathroom? And you go, well, how do you say it? And then they don't remember. And so you just point to it and then they say it. And this also serves later on, because a word like, the I can word, that they'll learn that later on. How come you have 2 verbs together, the second one you don't conjugate? You can then pull from these expressions they learn from the first few weeks of their first level to then teach some grammar structures, maybe in classes, months or years ahead, using known structures that they're already very comfortable with. Again, for more intermediate speakers, if you're having them do a debate or a conversation and you want them to react or respond, what students often tend to do is, like, if we're supposed to talk for 3 minutes, like I'll talk for 90 seconds, you'll talk for 90 seconds, bye. And it's not really a conversation if there's no reactions. In real life, if someone was telling you for a minute about what social media they use, and you just say, great, I use, and you never say anything, there's never any connection to it, that's not really, you're kind of doing presentational if no one reacts to it. So, but oftentimes textbooks, or even if you create your own lessons, we often don't include these little words like me too, or I disagree, or what do you think? So again, they're just sort of there, available. I even had some students a few years ago who did a whole conversation just using these terms. Like, tell me more. Well, what do you think? I don't know, really? And it was kind of silly, but they knew where to find the words that they needed. So using emojis as a visual support. So recently I had the level 4 students who were doing the present perfect, like the I have, who has, and we did never have I ever. And so their homework was to create some questions. And so I had them use emojis to explain any new vocabulary. So a question like, have you ever swam with dolphins? So then they put the little emoji in there of dolphins, because delphines was not a word we'd ever learned, but anyone can look at and understand what it means. So rather than translating it or students just not responding, that visual support helps them understand and just move forward and answer the question. If you teach subjunctive with emotions, you know, it frustrates, those are all very visible. It frustrates me, I'm happy that, I'm surprised that. There's emojis for all those things. So you can teach those emotion expressions rather than the translation or vocab list just by using the emoji. Vocabulary. So, I mean, if you look in your phone, I mean, there's like 100 food words there. So you can, rather than giving the translation for pear or pineapple, just show the picture. And there's even this site, which is kind of cool, that's listed there, which is a random emoji generator. So it'll just, you put in a number and it'll just give you however many emojis. And if you're doing, maybe when they're doing narration in the past tense, or you're having them tell a story or talk about their childhood, you know, once upon a time, there was someone who got lost at sea and he survived on watermelon. And then all of a sudden he got a phone call from an alligator. I mean, I don't know, but like that's there again, where instead of where they can use images, and also they're all familiar with emojis to put together a story. So I'm sure you can think of many other ideas of what to do with that as well. And then of course, you as the teacher can also be visual support. So when the office calls me, I answer the phone in the language. And the secretaries have learned a little bit of Spanish by that. So talking to your colleagues in the hallways in the target language, talking to students outside of classroom in the target language. Our department, we all have t-shirts because, you know, one person is a Mrs., one person's a Miss, one person's a Madame, and I'm the Senor. So even those little words, because there's the 4 of us in the high school. I have on my wallpaper of my school computer, each week I put a different meme. Sometimes they're in Spanish that they can understand, or sometimes they're kind of those language memes that you probably have maybe seen on Instagram, or again, just do a Google image search. And then just when I'm closing a window, they might like, oh, what is that? And then we look at it for a second. So just another opportunity for them to see that. And memes is something that they are all familiar with. Change your phone settings to the target language and show them that you do that, and they can do it too. And then talk to the students about your experience as a language learner, what you do to figure out new words. And sometimes they ask you a word, or you come across a word and you don't know what it means, or you make a mistake. And so just show them the good technique of, you know, write it down, look it up later, and then tell them what it means or what the correction is. So feel free to type in the chat any other ideas you have or things that you do with your classes that provide some visual support or body language or gesture support that helps your students to understand when you're speaking in the target language. Yeah, so thanks, Rich. So I also draw on the board. Maybe you're being sarcastic like I am, but it usually doesn't come out very good. And we kind of spend more time like analyzing my inability to draw. But again, it's a way to avoid the translation, and maybe you have a little laugh in the meantime. Okay, Laura draws as well. Speaking slower than what I think is slow. Yeah. Enacting it out, of course. Connector words, of course. The transitions are also something that we use in natural language, but sometimes there's not really a section for them in the unit, or where do they learn them? Where actually we haven't done it yet, but we'd like to, in our department, create a list of connecting words that, like, in level 1, everyone makes sure they know, the kids know these 5 words. Level 2, they do those 5 and then 5 more. So that way it's not until they're in AP when they learn they have to include transition words. That's something we're working on. Okay, so thank you for your responses. Feel free to continue in the chat. I'm going to move forward. So the next, our comprehension check. So as we are speaking the target language and we're using visuals and gestures, you know, are they getting it? Like, are we speaking slow enough? Is our drawing good enough for them to figure out what's going on? And of course, the students don't need to understand everything. If you remember from your methods classes, that I+1, so they understand kind of most of it, but if they understand every single word you say, they're never going to learn anything new. So what are some things we can do where they don't need to produce any language, because the interpretive ability means just kind of their understanding of it without producing it. So how can we assess, what they understand? So, very simply, just an A or B, a yes or no, right or wrong, or I do a lot of logical, illogical. So again, for my, beginning novice Spanish 1 students, it's something very basic like, sí or no, and you have to make it very clear those are two separate words, or lógico o ilógico. And, I also am like tipping over at the same time. So they see like those are separate words, and it's also written down. I'll show you an example of a response card in a minute. Many of us use mini whiteboards so they can, if you're doing time or numbers or alphabet or responding to questions, they can just hold it up. So they don't need to say anything, but you can kind of look around. Yes, good, 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 and address any issues that you see. Polls and surveys. I use a program called Poll Everywhere, which I presented about at other conferences, which the students can just respond on their phone or their computer with how much do you like it? How often do you do it? Do you agree or disagree? Drawing or acting things out. Now, I did this yesterday. A lot of students don't like to act things out. And I know we're all trying to be more sensitive to like students feeling comfortable in our classroom. So I gave them the option when it was their turn to do vocabulary. They could either draw it, explain it, or act it out. So, everyone still had to do something, but that hopefully with that student choice, that allowed all of them to feel comfortable. And then exit ticket, self-reflection. So this is a student response card that I've had for a long time, and they're just printed on like cardstock. And so the students just hold it up. Like if I want to answer A, I hold it up so my hands are covering the B and C, and then, or I rotate it to show the B and I'm covering the C and the A. And that's a way for them to respond, and something also tangible, manipulative, and they don't need to say or write anything in target language, they're just responding. So maybe it's a yes, no, maybe, or what food group, or what class, or agree, disagree, not sure. It's also something where you just have what the ABC mean, and then you can just say out loud rather than having to kind of create something new. Moving around to 4 corners. And so we probably all have done it with like the I like, I don't like. But like one of the vocabulary words we have is to surf. Well, most of my kids in central Pennsylvania haven't surfed. So I'm just like, well, go to the side, you'd think you'd like it. But why not provide them with words like I've never done it, I'm afraid of it, I don't know how to do it. So, think of different ways to do those corners so that everyone can respond, truthfully instead of just being forced into one of those. Some other things you can do with, it doesn't have to be 4, of course, but I've also done, I'm just thinking of now like a human graph. So like you have like maybe I totally agree, I disagree entirely, and they form a line. And so like from the front of the room, it kind of forms like a bar chart, if that makes sense. So, depending on the size of your room or the number of students you have, if you don't want to do the 4 corners, because they tend to like start touching each other and facing the wrong direction, you'd have them form lines as well. I have a big class, so we actually did that in the hallway to allow a little bit more social distancing and allow them to move around and change locations. So other examples are there that childhood, now, both, or neither. So thinking when you're doing like imperfect or the childhood unit. I do a lot of the different levels of agreement of things. How often you do it to teach those adverbs. So like the always, almost always, sometimes, rarely, never, which are other good kind of those additional words that we want students to learn. Predictions. So also kind of a vocabulary activity. So rather than just translating the vocabulary or drawing it or playing bingo. So we did this again with the level 1 with their classes a few weeks ago. So I have 28 students in that class. So we had just learned the numbers through 30. So how many students in the class, or how many students in our class have a music class this semester? And then I have the one student, and they just write it down on a little sheet of paper, and then, okay, so who takes a music class? And everyone, those who do, stand up. Now, there's really no way for them to know it. It's just kind of a way to practice numbers, but also a way to like hear the different classes. Or who has with them today this school supply, or who has ever done this? So a way where it's kind of a listening activity and a way to respond without having to produce any language. And pre-COVID, I had them do something where they kind of sat back to back. And so I'd say, does your partner prefer, cake or ice cream? And then they would indicate like cake was 1 finger, ice cream was 2 fingers. And then I'd ask all the students in the row, and then the person that they had their back with, I'd say, okay, so do you prefer cake or ice cream, to see like, kind of like a dating game kind of thing. Like, do you know what your partner would say? I'm like, what? I thought you like ice cream, so it's kind of fun and something different. But again, it can all be done in the target language without translating, with really no prep on the part of the teacher. You just use the students and you just say the words that you probably already have on your list or in your resources. Okay, so continuing. So negotiating meeting and then requesting clarification and assistance, because those kind of, to me, are kind of the same thing. So as I said at the beginning, sometimes we tend to default to presentational because that's probably how we learned. And, we often like doing the restaurant skit or the doctor skit, and we give them time in class and they write it out and they present it and no one really listens and they clap annoyingly, and then they didn't do the grammar, vocab, expression you want them to use anyways, and then the class goes. So I never really had much success with doing those, and they're not interpersonal because it's scripted. So it's really just a reading or a pronunciation activity at that point. And in real life, we hardly ever memorize lines or a script before we talk to someone. So, ACTFL, quotes the research of students acquire language through meaning making with others. So they need to use the language in some way. So just, playing a translation game isn't really going to help them retain it for much time. And then when learners hear large amounts of comprehensive input and they are engaged in meaning making, they understand and retain what they hear and they use it to form their own message. So again, the meaning making, they need to use it in some sort of way, and that will help them to retain it more. So these are some texts. We just switched text 2 years ago, but these are from the actual text that we used for 10 years in my district, that sometimes my colleagues thought were interpersonal because there's the little people talking to each other in the corner. It says hablar or parler, but they're not really interpersonal. So this is for Spanish 3, the first unit, and it's the grammar is the past tense, and it's on camping. And yes, 2 students are talking to each other, but I know what you're going to say because I see the exact same page in my book. And the questions are kind of weird, and they don't even need to know what relámpagos means to ask the question. It's really a grammar activity that 2 kids are saying to each other. The 6th one, the respuesta personal, if they make their own question, that could be interpersonal, but the other ones are not interpersonal just because it's a partner activity, because I know what you're going to say and I don't need to listen to what you say because I'm already practicing what I'm going to say to you. It's not interpersonal if there's no negotiation of meaning, because I already know what's going to happen. This one as well. So, these are more open-ended questions, but the problem is when students see multiple questions together, what are they going to do? They're going to say, ¿Tienes un trabajo después de las clases? ¿Qué haces? ¿Tienes un horario flexible? They just read all the questions together. So even if I don't have an after-school job, I've already asked you, what do you do? And you have a flexible schedule. So they don't think of those things because they're just asking the question on the page. And I already know you're going to ask me that. So I don't really have to, there's no negotiation of meaning. And then once you respond, what do I do with what you told me? Nothing. I just ask question 2. So that's not good. This is from our French textbook, our French 1 textbook. I don't know why you weren't able to identify the guitar as a guitar, but you have to ask your partner that that's a guitar. It's really just to practice these random, items that they have in the first unit. But even though it says parler and has the people talking to each other, it's not interpersonal because I don't need to do anything with what you tell me. The same thing with this in a food unit, because I see the pictures of the food. And if you tell me whether it's healthy or not, I don't do anything with that information. So that's why you want to do an information gap activity, and you probably have heard of those. But the ones that are often pre-prepared are not really that, because you have to be able to do something with that information. So they need to know what their role is. So is it, cashier and customer? Are they two friends? Are you college roommates on the first day? And then they need to get information from the other person that you don't already have. If you already have the information on your paper, I don't need to talk to you. So you probably have a version A and a version B that have different information on it, which forces me to talk to you to get the information from person B. And then once I get the information from person B, I need to do something with it. For the novice students, this requires a lot of modeling because they just look at each other's papers and write down the prices or write down the foods, or they do it in English, or they translate it. So it requires a lot of back and forth with maybe a strong student, and you model. Maybe you have to model half the activity so they can do the other half of the activity on their own. For that third part, so I ask you a question, you respond with information I need, and then what do I do with that information? So you need that kind of that third piece to it to make it interpersonal. So think of, so if you were to tell me your favorite class, I ask you that based upon a schedule you have on your paper. Maybe I have to determine whether I agree with what you said or not. So that adds, I need to listen to you in order to do my last component. Or they tell you the price. Is that a good price or a bad price? And there's many other examples there as well. So just think it needs to have three pieces. So like I say something, you give me something, and then I do something with what you give me. So that's how I classify it as something interpersonal. It has to have the back and forth, a total of 3 interactions. So this is one that I found just searching for infogap like in Google Images. And this clearly is for a French class that's practicing probably the partitive articles, the do and the de la and things like that, and the food unit that's often taught in those lessons. And so it has the first 2 components. It has, I ask you the question. So, like student B, do you, would you like to drink some orange juice or some apple juice? And then I look at my pictures. I only have a picture of apple juice. Okay, so that's good. So I had to listen to what you said. But then once I say I prefer or I want to have the apple juice, what does the élève B do with that? Nothing. You just ask the next question. So I'm wondering if you can put in the chat, what's something that could be that step 3 that once I ask you what type of juice you want and you understand the question, you tell me you want apple juice, what can then I do with that to make this a truly like interpersonal, somewhat more useful activity in the target language? Ah, okay. Yeah, I was thinking, do you have like, is it out of stock? Like, are we sold out of it? Like, I was thinking of something like that too. Tell them the cost, and so I have another paper that tells me that like a menu that would then say the cost, and maybe you calculate the total bill at the end of the conversation. Exactly. Some things are going to be out, so. Yeah, so just something like that, where it forces me to ask the question, there's a response, and then I do something with your response. Because otherwise, if I only have to ask the question, I'm looking at the next question to prepare. I'm not going to listen to what you say. These are all great examples. So it's nothing really that difficult, but sometimes we just forget that third piece. Okay. So kind of like a March Madness thing. So you could have using brackets, and printyourbrackets.com is for like sports brackets, but I used it for this. So if you have students in small groups, which food do you prefer? And then see what the consensus or which has more votes in the group. And then they keep going through until they figure out like what is the favorite food of those 16 foods. So they're really just kind of asking the basic question. Maybe they're pressing the word I prefer and then just food vocabulary, but it can all be done in the target language. There's no translation, and the students will have to understand what those 16 foods mean in order to give their preference, because evaluating or giving an opinion is also a higher level thinking skill, which sometimes in the novice level classes, we do a lot of like, draw a picture or translate but when they have to give an opinion, that's a little bit higher order. So they're going to have to understand those 16 words in order to give their opinion and see what wins. Okay, so I'll do one more section with the few minutes we have left on how do we get them to go beyond just a one word or a one short sentence. And what I usually say to my students, you know, with meat, con carne, like to have a little bit more juicy of a sentence. So I said before, sometimes my level 4 students, they're reverting back to things that my level 1 students are learning at the same time. So what's happened in those 3 years? This is something that I've seen, maybe you've seen this before, of where students can self-evaluate where they are in terms of proficiency. So I haven't participated at all, a word, a phrase, and I've spoken a complete sentence or a question. So maybe there's something, you know, elementary or middle school, but you know, a lot of stuff we do in high school or college also could probably be appropriate for this, where students can say, okay, so in today's activities, how much language did I produce? And they can self-evaluate and perhaps set a goal. This is something else that I found in a presentation by Ken Stewart coming from Nathan Litz of New Jersey, where these are some can-do statements, and these would be perfect for novice, but it could be any can-do statements that you can probably just take from your curriculum or take from your word walls or essential questions, you probably already have them, and students evaluate their progress. So I can't do it yet, I can do it with help, so with maybe with my vocabulary list or with the teacher prompt, or I can do it on my own. And students can use that as practice in class, and then it can also be the assessment where you say, okay, so tell me your name. And if they can do it pretty well, then you give them, you know, the I can do it alone. If you have to prompt them, well, you want to start with, and maybe that's in the middle column. And so you could do that as a way to self-assess, but also be the assessment. Here are some connecting words that we talked about. So instead of saying, you know, I like chicken, I like beef, can you make it into one sentence? And again, some of these are more appropriate at different levels than others, but I try to tell my students, I don't want you to sound like a robot. I want you to sound like someone who actually speaks the language. And we tend to speak in these phrases with and, also, because, and so little by little introducing those. Those 4 questions in bold are questions we often ask our students. You know, where do you go? We're teaching the word go in probably the community unit. You know, what are you like when you're learning the descriptions? So how can we add some of those connecting words? So according to your family, what are you like? And so you're using that word according to, you know, según, selon, which probably we never teach in a novice class, but is a good word for them to know going forward. Not just where do you go, but why do you go there? So maybe they say, you know, I go to the stadium, I go to the library. But can you teach them, like, you know, para leer, to read, to study, to talk with my friends? Again, just adding a little bit more meat onto the sentence. In the clothing unit, you know, what are you wearing today? Even though we can see what we're wearing, we ask them that question. We ask them, why are you wearing it? You know, and you think, well, why questions are really hard for novices. Well, like for something like that, they probably know weather expressions. They know maybe hot and cold. So why are you wearing pajamas? It's Friday, it's raining, I'm hot. You know, so they can probably still respond to some of those, even with novice, with some examples you give them. So think of just getting them to say more than rather just yes and no questions, of adding some additional questions for them to expand. And I'll skip this. And okay, so I'm gonna stop there. I had 2 more left, but that's pretty good for 45 minutes. So if there's any additional questions you have or resources you want to share on the chat, feel free to add those. We'll just see if anyone else has any last questions you want to ask. I know the time goes very fast. Oh, I see, Lauren, you have a hand up. So if you want to ask, if you want to unmute, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike, for your presentation. I just had a quick question about when you facilitate 4 corners type activities. I feel like I always struggle with those because my students are really interested in the prompts, but then once they move, they have a really hard time. Like, they want to do some follow-up conversation about it, but then I have a really hard time kind of keeping everyone with me. Do you just kind of move through the prompts? Do you do follow-up conversation? Like, how do you facilitate that?
Yeah, that's good, especially if a larger class and then they start talking and they're in English and they're, if my students are all touching each other and getting disruptive. So what I often do is I'll if you have someone who's kind of a smaller, like a singleton or a smaller group, like ask them, like, defend your position to the rest. Now, that would be for my level 4 students, I'd do that. Or for the more novice students, maybe ask them, like, if they were choosing, do you like a lot? So maybe it was with food, so which restaurant do you prefer to have the French fries? And so something like that. With the novice students, I don't do so much of them talking amongst each other because it tends, as you say, to go off the rails. So I'll do a follow-up question just to make sure they actually understood what the prompt was and they're not just following their best friend to that section of the room. And then with the intermediate students, I can usually say, I also won't do it for every single, maybe you have 10 prompts. Well, them having 10 conversations is probably too many. So maybe like we'll do it twice. So the first 2 or 3, I'll ask them a follow-up question and I'll say, talk to your partner about, and then they will have seen me model a follow-up question. And then it doesn't also drag on for too long because if other seats for 20 minutes and they start, that doesn't work either classroom management wise. So maybe that'll help.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Mike, there was a quick question of whether you would share your presentation or not. So if you're willing to do that, that would be found in the place where all of them are being kept. So I don't know if you're planning.
I will be doing that.
All right, so there's that answer. On behalf of PSMLA, we want to thank everyone for attending this session with Mike Bogdan. We welcome and encourage your feedback on our sessions. Please use the link in the PDF program or found in the chat to give this session feedback. The recording of this session will be available to conference registrants after the event. As a reminder for teachers in Pennsylvania, in order to qualify for this session for Act 48 credit, you must complete the Act 48 reflection form. You can find the Act 48 form linked in the PDF program or in the chat. These forms must be completed by, I think, within 72 hours of the end of this session. And that form is right here in case you need it. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.